But Louise, just to pick you up on your sort of grey power that you were talking about, retraining and upskilling people who are older and have come out of employment, I think that's really, really important, and maybe that's more an American type of idea, really. I would see them as harnessing the grey vote, the grey power, the grey pound, and you hear all about all that sort of thing going on in America. Is that a European concept at all, or are the Irish going to drive this? I see Marks and Spencer's are very anxious. They hire older people, but they're the only company I really know of here who makes an effort to target the grey workers, really. And are we going to spearhead it in Europe?
But I can't take credit for that, really. I mean, as you say, there has been a movement, the Grey Panthers, the grey sort of power, definitely in America, because I think in certain now, it would be middle class and upwards America have recognised the fact that people are not old anymore at 65, you know what I mean? Or 60, that is sort of passive, as people still have good years ahead of them and want to work, and that indeed it's actually good for people to work after that age, because otherwise, I mean, as we all know, men in particular tend to become very prone to die very shortly after they retire, you know, just simply to have nothing to do. No, what I find very interesting in Europe, and I think it's the point that both Mairead and you have made, Commissioner, as well, is that, I mean, obviously there are great differences in all the countries. Like in a lot of the accession states, people retire much earlier there, because a lot of the work that was done in a lot of those countries was very physical work, okay? You know, mining, steel working, these sort of things that we associate with the Soviet bloc. And people tended to retire at 50 from that area. I worked for a few years on a very interesting project with Siberia, and virtually everybody working in the social services were people who had retired with sort of very highly qualified in the science area, but had been doing ghastly jobs in chemical factories and in whatever. But they retire at 50 and then move into the health and social services there, you know. So no, I mean, what I find now, to try and answer your question, is that there is a lot of European, again, driven projects looking at different ways in which older people can participate more fully in society. I mean, the whole social inclusion thing, not simply that you can have a bus to go in shopping, it's seen much more as contributing to society and offering, you know, older people have been seen as a bonus, as being a benefit to society, not a burden. So that in a lot of the Scandinavian countries and in Northern Europe, you know, in the Benelux countries, people would tend to continue to work if they choose in various guises and whatever. But it wouldn't be so much the case in the Mediterranean countries, where women traditionally didn't work when they got married, you know, in the Greece of the southern Italies and Spain and Portugal. You don't tend to have a cohort of older women who work because they left the workforce if they were ever in the labour force. Regarding kind of, there has been a shift, and I think it's working in solidarity with people. It's not just Marks and Spencer's. I mean, the Equality Authority about 4 years ago, published in their magazine a very, very good article from B&Q about older workers, okay? And quite a number of companies have now chosen to have older workers coming back into the workforce. They find three things. One is older workers take far fewer days off. Ill days, sick days off, which would seem contradictory with this notion we have, older people are sick, you know, which isn't true either, you know. So they take fewer days off work, they're more punctual, etc. They tend to have very, very better, I mean, of course it all depends on the person, but by and large, older people will have quite well-honed personal skills, okay, so they're good in shop situations and helping people out to find the right, where you get the shruggy young fellas who don't know, you know. I mean, you get an older person who'll go and look for it and whatever. But thirdly, and I think maybe most important, that having an intergenerational sort of workforce is actually better for everybody, the better morale, and companies have discovered this. Now, this is not an Irish thing, it's a very much European thing, the whole idea. I mean, the 1993 year for older people was of intergenerational solidarity. And while the emphasis on intergenerational solidarity can sometimes simply be young people working to pay into the pension funds of older people, in the narrow definition of intergenerational solidarity, I would see intergenerational solidarity of the sort of thing you were suggesting, of sort of school children being aware of what's going on, people working together, people breaking down the barriers between older people thinking all young people are louts and violent and drinking too much and having sex 24 times a day, you know, and young people thinking that older people are crotchety, stupid, you know, all the rest of it, and ill, you know, to break down those sort of barriers and to work together on things. So, but it's not an Irish thing, but I think the little projects that we're trying to do are quite unique in a way, where we will be providing supports for people over and above just sort of throwing them in at the deep end. So, thank you.
First of all, I think there are some practical things to sort out, and I really think we should look into EU funding for some of the projects that you've mentioned here. I mean, you need money to realize your ideas and your plans. So I think with the help of our representation, we ought to take another look for money. If you could apply from different programs and funding, I really think we should explore every possibility, because I think, for example, the kind of project that you mentioned ought to fit into some program at the EU level. So let's look at that as well. I'm not, maybe you have already, but if not, we should make an effort to look into that. So we should be practical as well. I think that this is, to answer to your question, I think this is something probably you are in a way spearheading, or you are advancing the things, but I can notice also that in Sweden there is a big campaign called 60 Plus, and that they are, in a way, they're focusing on women's health, because they discovered that women were also given not as good health care as required, so they were treated differently when they came with symptoms of a heart attack to the hospital. So they have been pushing for equal treatment also when it comes to their health and looking at their health. And they have, but it has raised all these other issues about looking at also older women as an asset and a resource in society, and with all the avenues opening up, as you've mentioned. I will myself apply for membership if you have a branch of angry older women. And I understand I qualify already for 55. So in a couple of weeks' time I will qualify for the organization. I think the demographic development in Europe will help in a way, because it will be necessary. It will be necessary unless we import children and young people and workers from other places. We will not be able to sustain our standard of living unless we also use women and older people in our workforce. So this is very important, and this will happen. This is again an example of the things that we cannot imagine, or we cannot plan properly until it hits us. It's maybe almost like with climate change. It's when we see the storms and the floods and the disasters that we are starting to believe in it and understand that this will happen.